So the narrative purporting that there are too many buyers out there and not enough inventory is false. The events that inspired the housing inventory shortage narrative was driven by a unique set of circumstances in the early response to the pandemic. Unfortunately, it was never true that we had a housing shortage. What we had was a demand surplus that was created by the economic incentives, primarily but not absolutely, driven by the Federal Reserve Bank's emergency rate cuts. It's important to understand the difference between a housing shortage and a demand surplus because it alters the way you view the housing market in terms of the supply-demand dynamics and also how you might participate in it. If you are operating under the assumption that price instability is a result of and continues to be the result of a housing shortage, my suggestion is that it is once again supply imbalance created by the previous year's conditions. In the same way there was a demand surplus induced by the Fed's emergency rate cuts, there is now a supply deficit resulting from housing inflation, which came as a consequence of the 2020 to 2021 exuberance that was markedly defined by refinancing activity. For those of you that are very data-driven, let me explain in detail how mortgage activity supports the supply-demand imbalance that was created as an indirect consequence of the Fed interrupting the housing cycle because of their response to the pandemic. There's a certain amount of amnesia in residential real estate with regard to what was occurring before the pandemic. What was occurring was a slow but steady Fed tightening cycle. By the time March 15th, 2020 arrived, we had witnessed a decade plus of a recovering housing market. Now, I realize that prices hadn't bottomed in many cases until 2012, and in some cases as late as 2013. But sales volume went up by 500,000 after we recessed severely in 2008. My point being is that we had a substantial time of equity built up. The latency which existed in this equity, by latency I mean an underlying condition that would influence the housing market. That latency specifically was wealth that had been accrued over the course of the past decade. It was unleashed into the housing market when the Fed dropped rates. $430 billion was extracted and 9 million more people simply renegotiated their loan terms to capitalize on better rates. But you have to dig even deeper to understand that this short window of activity, which produced the high hangover we now see across the nation in terms of unaffordability, was driven by a particular segment of mortgage applications. Between 2019 to 2020, there was a 66.8% increase in mortgage originations, and jumbo home purchase loans account for the largest share of this increase. A jumbo loan is an amount exceeding the conforming loan limit set by the Federal Housing Finance Agency. In other words, it can't be guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Jumbo loans can be used for investment properties, second residences, and vacation houses. This is exactly what we saw until originations fell off a cliff in 2022. There was a very tight window in which someone looking to get into the housing market could buy because mortgage payments on the principal alone went up 46%. That kind of incurred cost in housing expenses priced out the majority of buyers almost immediately. When you consider the rise in insurance, property taxes, the cost to finance a vehicle, that surplus demand was gone. And after that surplus demand was gone, you've had the residual effects of price instability created by a wealthy demographic of buyer. The existing resale market, people holding on to their homes and who didn't participate in the madness, have a pretty easy decision now to make: sell and rent, sell and downsize, or hold on to the asset, which accounts for the lock-in effect. Here's the unexpected twist, however. Inventory is surging in Florida. People are still choosing to sell their homes amid a potentially looming liquidity crisis due to various factors and higher interest rates. Go figure. The majority of the country, however, is simply experiencing supply constraints. How that plays out is anybody's guess. I have no idea. But what I do know is that there never was an inventory shortage, and with the glut of new home construction and the resale market coming alive, the conditions are completely different. Volume continues to decrease, inventory is rising, and while I wouldn't call it price gouging, valuation fundamentals have yet to return. Home prices in the housing market in general are acting like the type of inflationary buying activity we saw in 2020 and 2021 are standard across every percentile of home value. In many ways, lenders are held captive to this kind of consumer demand. The primary mortgage market has seen an increasing shift from mortgages issued by depository institutions to non-depository lenders. There was a claim made recently by Melody Wright, who has extensive knowledge of the mortgage space, that the government is now the primary owner of new mortgages, meaning that we are becoming a nation of borrowers from the government to finance our shelter. Long story short, there's no inventory shortage, there's no housing shortage. What used to be a demand surplus, however, is now a supply constraint. However, those conditions here in Florida, and this may be true in other areas of the country, have completely changed. So keep up to date with your data, check back in with Curbstone Consulting, and I'll see you next time.